What a crazy weekend it was in Russian politics. I mean, we woke up Saturday morning with the news that this rebel army, the Wagner army, was marching on Moscow. Now, if you're not up to speed on what's happened, the leader of that mercenary network, known as the Wagner Group, had been fighting Ukraine for the Russian army. The US estimates last year that they was 50,000 strong, maybe more. And we saw General Jack Keane on with Andrew Bolt talking about this. 40,000 of those 50,000 are Russian criminals, because the Wagner leader went around the remote parts of Russia recruiting people out of jails, murderers and rapists. Their leader decided he is sick of Putin's leadership, and he's marched his troops on Saturday toward Moscow. He's now stood them down and ordered them to return to Ukraine. But we came very, very close to some sort of civil war, I thought, at the weekend in the nuclear nation of Russia. As for the leader himself, Prigozhin, he's now in Belarus after making a deal with Putin. But as James Clapper, the American former director of the National Intelligence, said, it's all a little bit strange.
Maybe I spent too much time in intelligence, but this whole thing, this deal to me is kind of fishy. That all of a sudden, Prigozhin stopped, turned left or turned back, and then he's going to agree to go of all places, Belarus, which is essentially, from a security standpoint, an extension of Russia. This is an unanswered question, obviously, and hopefully as we learn more, we'll find out just what happened. But on its face, it's a little fishy to me.
So no civil war, but what does that all mean for Russia, Putin's leadership and the war in Ukraine? Joining me now is Michael Shoebridge from Strategic Analysis Australia. What did you make of this, Michael, when you woke up Saturday morning hearing that the Wagner army was about to march on Moscow?
Well, Steve, I initially thought Wagner's forces just aren't big enough to do anything that might even start to look like it threatens Putin. But we just saw another example that Vladimir Putin hasn't controlled events since he started his war against Ukraine back in February last year. There is no day he's been in control of events since then. I don't think Vladimir Putin or anyone else in Russia really knew which way this was going to go. The key thing that stopped Prigozhin from a successful march on Moscow is it turned out that none of the key Russian military units or commanders or governors actively supported him. But the thing that's got to have really disturbed Putin is all the Russian forces on that road to Moscow and in that city of Rostov that Wagner forces captured stood by and let the Wagner forces do what they wanted to do. That's the bigger bad news for Putin here.
So if we go all the way back to the start of this conflict in Ukraine, of course, Vladimir Putin refused to call it a war. He started calling it a military operation. It was going to all be over in 2 or 3 days. And he didn't really, did he, Michael, want to go back to the Russian people and use conscription to build up the numbers of his troops on the ground. And this is how this Wagner outfit managed to get their power, it seems to me. Exactly.
He filled the failures in the Russian military with this mercenary outfit. And, you know, James Clapper's right, it was a bunch of prisoners. Prigozhin, their commander, promised them their freedom if they fought in Ukraine. They were quite effective. They were really ruthless, bloody fighters around Bakhmut. And so they really strengthened the Russian campaign in Ukraine. Not enough to prevail, but they were a big part of the effort. So to have them turn against the Russian state and really turn on the Russian military leadership that Prigozhin condemned and wanted executed, that was extraordinary. And it just shows Putin doesn't have a state as we'd understand it. He's got a bunch of kind of empowered warlords and thugs around him, and this one went bad.
So has the Russian senior military personnel, the people running this war, are they as bad as what the Wagner leader says they are, that they're not doing their job properly and that they're sending young Russian boys to die?
Well, Prigozhin did exactly that himself. He threw his own forces into the meat grinder against the Ukrainians in Bakhmut. But really, it's not a case of a couple of individuals at the top of the Russian military that are failing. The whole system has failed. You know, their logistics system to supply ammunition and weapons has failed. Their training has failed. Their weaponry is outmatched by the Western military technology, which is good news for us. And Putin, of course, is the leader responsible for the disasters he's inflicted, not just on his own people and military, but on the Ukrainian people too. So it's been a litany of failure, not just two bad commanders.
How much of this news would be getting through to average Russians?
I think more around this Wagner episode will have leached out across the Russian population. The Russian state has really controlled media about the war in Ukraine itself, but this one's been right inside Russia and on the road to Moscow. There'll be ripples of this event travelling through Russia and certainly through all the elites and all the people around Putin. And as I say, the fact that people just stood by, you know, key military units and commanders stood by and let the Wagner forces through, that's the most jarring thing for Putin.
How much trouble would Prigozhin be in? I mean, Putin doesn't like anyone disagreeing with him, let alone turning his forces toward Moscow. I mean, is this bloke going to survive?
Well, he's got no guarantee of personal safety if he's going to go off to Belarus. We don't even know he's there yet. He's turned off all communications. No one knows where he is. And I don't think he thinks he's going to be living in luxury and safety in Belarus, which is a puppet state of Moscow. This is a band-aid solution that Putin has got right now. It's got him out of immediate trouble. There aren't forces marching on Moscow. But really, remember what Putin wanted at the start of this. It was meant to be Russian forces marching on Kiev. Now he's worried about his own forces marching on Moscow. So this solution is just a band-aid for now.
So on that, what guarantee is there that these mercenaries, who would have been presumably being paid more than the Russian soldiers, that they're actually going to go, OK, no worries, we'll now turn out and fight for the mother country, because presumably they're not going to get paid as much?
Well, I don't think anyone can trust that Putin is going to deliver on the deal, whether it's the Wagner mercenaries themselves. You know, part of the deal was none of them would be punished. Some of them would be incorporated into the Russian army and others would be allowed to go safely home. Putin doesn't normally deliver on deals with people he thinks have threatened him. Just like Prigozhin, but the reason we're not hearing from him living in a resort in Belarus, the reason he's telling no one where he is he doesn't trust the deal either. So a bunch of demobilised, betrayed mercenaries, that's bad news inside Russia. So the war is going into Russia. It's sort of boomeranging on Putin, and it's looking more like Russian weakness domestically is being exposed now.